Hello and thank you for being here. I thought I'd bring you some insights about this important and exciting event of Jupiter conjunct Neptune in Pisces. The event occurred on April 12th, 2022, and although we can look at that day as the moment when the two planets formed in alignment from the Earth's perspective, always important to mention that because we are the co-creators of these realities through our consciousness and perception, even though our perception of these events are subconscious, in our subconscious where we know a lot more than we do consciously, and especially in the deeper reaches of our subconscious where we come into a unity consciousness, we know where the planets are, you might say, at a collective level at least. Anyway, the main point is that the event can be understood better as a seed. Anytime there's a conjunction, like a new moon, it begins a cycle. And so we have a new cycle between Jupiter and Neptune. The last time they occurred was when in Pisces, was back in 1856. So it's been a long time coming. And sure enough, at that time, it coincided with a very important kind of spiritual awakening and form of revolution, at least in North America, that, we can look back at. So you can go look at the spiritual revival of 1856 and get a little glimpse of what I'm talking about. It's important to note that Jupiter is the traditional ruler for Pisces and Neptune's the modern ruler. So both of those planets in Pisces are in honor. So to have them conjunct in Pisces adds a whole other level of specialness and importance too. The importance of it is that it's a part of the fabric of our times. The archetypal principles that the planets represent are indicators of important themes and cycles of destiny that we experience individually and collectively. So yeah, it's an epic time. Now, it is happening in a very kind of distinct way, and I'm going to bring some attention to that. I'm also going to show you, in addition to the Western astrology chart and those distinctions I'm hinting at, but also I'm going to show you the Vedic astrology perspective, at least from the sidereal zodiac, and give you a little glimpse there, so give it a bit of its own moment to shine. So, okay. Let's just dive in here. First of all, yeah, Jupiter and Neptune are gas giants. They're a big part of the solar system, of course. Jupiter's bigger than all the planets put together, and the moons. That's how big Jupiter is. And yet, it's ironic and interesting to mention, as a quick aside, the Sun remains 99.99% of the mass of the entire solar system. So even despite the fact that Jupiter is larger than all the planets and the moons in the solar system put together, the Sun is still 99.99% the mass. It's kind of an interesting and beautiful thought to understand that. It's a bit of an aside, but I wanted to mention very briefly. But they are, from our perspective, in our understanding of these planets in a factual way, what we call gas giants. Very large compared to the Earth. So it's not about size as such. It's a more of a principle-driven reality. Pluto, for example, is very, very, very small, but very powerful. And we observe the impact of Pluto, whether you want to call it a planet or not, it remains a feature of the solar system. And from the standpoint of observation and the impact that Pluto creates in terms of transformational, processes, well, let me tell you something. You begin to realize very quickly that we're not just kind of talking about linear concepts here. That's why astrology is a branch and a feature of metaphysics. It transcends the physics. And you have to understand that and enter into a whole different consciousness, a holistic consciousness. Now, it's also interesting to note that April 12th, that day 12, resonates very, very strongly with Pisces, the 12th sign of the zodiac. In the tarot, the 12 cards, the Hangman linked to Neptune. So 12 is generally a good number to understand as seeing the world with all new eyes. It's an alternative perspective. It's known as the pattern buster. Okay, 12 is the breakdown of old patterns. And, where in the tarot it's the hangman. So the hangman's hanging upside down to see the world in new ways, with new perspectives. And so in doing so, we are breaking free of old patterns. And in that respect, it's time. So it's a collective time for us to break free of certain patterns that we've become accustomed to seeing the world through. We're kind of talking on a generic level here, a mass level, and you can only be general when you do that. So give that a thought, and how these are playing out in your life is a much more subjective, personal story, and it's all subject to your destiny, where you are in your evolutionary journey, etc., etc. So just know that as well. Now, so the main thing is that it's interesting if you also add the numerology here. If you add the numbers April 12, 2022, you're going to end up with the number 13, 13-4. Just so happens 13 is the death card, the transformational principle that comes with that number that we're all quite familiar with, 13. So we're dealing with a little bit of a story, just looking at the astrology itself, some of the numerology. Okay, so what we're going to do is just have a little look. Now, this here is the Sabian symbol for that day, for that degree. Jupiter conjunct Neptune in Pisces, April 12, 2022 at 24 Pisces, which is the 354th degree of the zodiac, which interestingly enough, when added, equals 12. Just a little play on things. Now, dealing with a little Omicron congestion, perhaps, not sure, but I call it a spring cold myself, but yeah, dealing with a little congestion, and maybe I'll get some extra attention by saying I've got the Omicron variant. Hey, awesome. Build up the antibodies. What we are dealing with, though, here is this nice little Sabian symbol. I like bringing attention to the Sabian symbols, which is the astrological mandala for the zodiac itself. It could apply even to the Vedic model, just rather interesting, but it's generally designed for the tropical zodiac. Anyway, why I'm bringing attention to this, because the exact degree of the conjunction is this 24 Pisces, and it shows it's kind of sending a message, and I think this is worth considering, that this is a theme that is being sowed from this perspective, for this entire cycle. Remember, Jupiter won't conjunct Neptune again in Pisces for a very, very long time. We're talking, upwards to, 170 years or something. I'm not sure what the number is, to be honest, at this moment. It's not terribly important, but it's a long time away. The last time, once again, was in 1856 when it occurred, and they had that, again, that spiritual revival, which you can look up online. Now, the Sabian symbol image, like a tarot card, says, on a small island surrounded by the vast expanse of the sea, people are seen living in close interaction. Okay. Now, the point here is you want to read it from a more cryptic, symbolic level, not literally. Okay, that's important with tarot readings, etc., and symbolic images, archetypal principles. And it says, keynote, the need to consciously accept one's own personal limitations in order to concentrate one's energy and to live a centered and fulfilled life. Okay, that, looking at our world right now, we are being pushed, it's true, to really focus, to know where our attention needs to go. With so many distractions in this age of distraction, we need more than ever to, and with the economies the way they are, with all the opportunities available, we are kind of, among other things, being pushed to become more present, more focused, more deliberate, more on purpose, etc. Anyways, it goes on and says every individualized person is a small island in the vast ocean of mankind. The ego fulfills a necessary function as it sets boundaries and gives specific character to the consciousness. Within these boundaries, complex interplay linking and integrating the various aspects of the personal life can operate constructively. In time, these ego boundaries can only expand but can become a zone of intense interchange between the inner and the outer, between the individual and the community, between man and the universe. It's kind of interesting because, they're talking about the ego boundaries, and kind of traditionally in Eastern, philosophy, the whole idea is to annihilate the ego. Well, I'm going to just tell you a little secret. That kind of was a cult consciousness. Annihilating the ego is actually an illusion. But what you can do, you cannot function in the physical realm without an ego. However, you can learn to function as a soul-centered person. So rather than annihilate the ego, the process of the spiritual path is to become soul-centered. Okay? And so you thereby have an ego versus are the ego. And the process of shifting into a soul-centered state is one by which the ego becomes increasingly more subordinated to the soul. That's the beautiful idea. That's the traditional historical understanding. And then we can make use of our ego without becoming egocentric about it. Egocentrism is a problem. If you were to say, what's the problem with the world? And the answer is egocentrism. That's it. Basically, an egocentrism is directly related to two other keywords, materialism and attachment. It just so happens Neptune and Jupiter in Pisces is all about non-materialism, more about spiritualism, and it's about ascension or transcendentalism or non-attachment. Neptune is a very non-attached kind of planet. Where Uranus can be like that too. Neptune's more non-attached in a more communion consciousness sense. There's a sense of being one with all that is. That's the highest expression of Neptune, you might say. The deep, deep state of communion, the samadhi, the mysticism, the awareness that there is division that we experience due to our ego mind, but beyond that, there's only a continuum of wholes within wholes. So there's this grand oneness in the universe, and that's the mystical message. I just wanted to bring it back to your attention because how important it is in association with Neptune and Pisces. Now, it goes on to read, this fourth stage symbol tells us that the first duty of any man or woman is to be truly what he or she is as an individual who has particular dharma, i.e. a place and function in a vaster whole. And all eventually will come to realize their oneness within the whole earth, which includes everything and at least indirectly everyone. Isn't that a beautiful message? That's really the takeaway here, where we can celebrate the understanding that individuation is not egocentrism. It's kind of a tricky thing to differentiate between an egocentric perspective versus an individuated perspective. Okay, so sometimes people who are very egocentric, you might say, or when any of us are, because we can flip in and out of it. It's not just a matter of whether I am or not. Any person can flip into a kind of an egocentric place, even an enlightened master, although the whole idea of the enlightened master is they don't, and if they ever do, it doesn't last very long or it doesn't have a big impact. But they can hypothetically flip into it if they get insulted or if they get injured or something. They kind of go into their ego instinct survival, posture, but the enlightened master or the enlightened soul or the self-realized soul, whatever you want to call it exactly, the master of spiritual consciousness, a very highly soul-centered being, a being who operates from their soul center as a matter of course on a daily basis and pass the tests of not succumbing to ego reactions, which tend to be basically instinctual fight or flight and or take it personally reactions, which we all bump into. When we do, we're bumping into our ego. No big deal. It's all part of the game. But at least we can have a body of knowledge and a juxtaposition to understand, oh yeah, that's the ego. That's what you're doing, or that's what I'm doing. And, that's what happens. So, hey, don't take it too seriously. Just learn to see it and reconnect yourself back into a soul-centered place where you come into a kind of state of gratitude, where you come to accept that the tests and lessons of life can be difficult sometimes, but you embrace them with gratitude, with a sense of it's all happening for you. It's much easier said than done, but people are very egocentric. It's always happening to them, or they tend to dominate their environment all the time, or it's always a you thing. It's not a I am being here and projecting and taking responsibility for it theme. It's always, some other thing. But, when people are less evolved and very egocentric, they don't even realize they're doing it. It's just like, what? They wouldn't even understand if you told them. So but everybody is a soul. So let's just be real clear. Everybody is a soul. There are no dark souls, by the way, but there are dark minds. Okay, so there's no such thing as a dark soul, believe it or not. People say it all the time. I'm like, I don't think it works like that. The soul exists in a non-dualistic realm. It can't be dark. It just doesn't work like that. But the mind can, because duality is a realm of mind. And there can definitely be dark minds. And of course, a dark mind is going to create a very dark shadow on what would otherwise be the soul light, right? So that's the story behind the Jupiter Neptune, basically. And this little read from the Sabian symbols really applies quite well, and I'm rather impressed by it. And it's just a reminder of this individuation factor. What's so beautiful and important about that as well, politically, is that we're living in an age where for some time now, there's always this homogenizing communism principle that's always encroaching and always trying to make its way in. And it's kind of a dark force. This, central bank digital currency, kind of control, big brother, whatever it is, it's just monopoly, domination of the market. This is ego. This, in fact, is beyond, that's very dark mind. It does not honor individuality. It has no honor. The dark force consciousness that wants to homogenize is very materialistic, very attached, very fearful, wants to control everything and everybody. It does not honor the individual dharma. It does not honor the nature of the physical reality that is the vehicle for the soul. It sees everything wrongly. It sees everything from the ego's perspective. It's got deep attachment, deep fear, deep control, deep no empathy, no compassion, no wisdom, no honor, no virtue, no love. That's the problem. And it cannot survive. It's a machine. It's a machine consciousness. It's like the movie The Terminator. If the machine mind with no soul takes over, we're doomed. If that's what the movie was trying to say. Once that shift happens, we're in big trouble, because that consciousness has no soul. It has no honor, no virtue, only linear, deductive, reductionistic thinking. And in it, as the story goes with the Terminator, we, as is true of the Matrix, we're like a plague. We're like a virus, the human beings, which is a misunderstanding of the school of life. It's yes, there's a lot of violence in this world, and it's full of war and pain, and it's not good, and it's partly because of dark force energy that lingers from way back when, And it's the kind of like we're infested with it, really. We're infested with this dark, low vibration energy that's been perpetuated by dark, nefarious forces. So, but when we understand that the true spiritual nature of reality wants to honor individuation. Like you can be in a field of flowers, but each flower is unique in its own special way. It's kind of like that and goes on and on. But more specifically, more importantly, we as human beings have a dharma. We have a reason for being here. There's a rhyme and reason, a purpose. And we're here to fulfill that within the context of everybody else fulfilling theirs, which definitely produces part of the drama of life. But it also is an important feature of the whole dynamic of the school that we're in on the planet. The school. The planet Earth is a school for souls. We're not necessarily meant to make it, nirvana, that you can't make the planet nirvana. It's not kind of like that. Nirvana is non-duality. It's the higher reaches of non-duality consciousness, where the material universe is duality. It goes on like that. So, but there are dimensions within duality which can be experienced in a mystical way, as with if you were out of your body or you're astral traveling or you're free from the physical, you can travel within the realms of mind, but those aren't nirvana. Anyway, just sharing these thoughts with you to it'll enlighten you a little more regarding the beautiful story behind Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces and this seed event that's underway right now. Okay, so now it so happens that the 12th of April 2022 in the Mayan dream spell, which I like because it's a system of Mayan astrology that's bridged with the Gregorian calendar, with the tropical zodiac. Some people have a problem with that. I've met them, and it's okay. Everybody has their right to think and believe what they want, but it works. That's the beauty of it. It works well enough to say, well, we can kind of talk all day about these interpretations of truth, but it gets a bit religious and dogmatic at worst when you kind of open yourself to the fact, for example, that languages evolved out of languages. Okay, so English evolved out of German, and the Angles, which is another form of German, if I'm not mistaken. But English evolved out of other languages. So is that a bad thing? And that's true of all languages. So it's the same thing with astrology. Systems can evolve out of other systems. And to get dogmatic about, oh, that's not the system, is kind of the problem out there. But hey. Anyway, getting back to it, the day, April 12, 2022, in that system, the Mayan dream spell is Yellow Electric Seed. I activate in order to target bonding awareness. I seal the input of flowering. I seal with this electric tone of service. I'm guided by the power of elegance. So it's this lovely little poem that gives you a little insight. There's a lot more to be said about that day. I'm not going to go into it right now. I just wanted to give you a little splash perspective on a very brief little poetic perspective on Yellow Electric Seed. But the keywords or the key theme within it is to raise consciousness. The seed is, in the most basic sense, just what it sounds like. It's the germination of new awareness. So it's kind of quite apropos that it would be this would be the theme on the day of the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, which is a seed event. Conjunctions are seed events, and they begin cycles. So the next time Jupiter and Neptune will conjunct is about just shy of about 13 years from now, but the next time they'll do it in Pisces is 150 about years, more than 170 years or so. So it's a long way away when they will conjunct again in that sign. So we'll get back to that though, and I'm just going to share some more insights here as we go. So now what I want to do here is pause. All right, so this is actually the Western astrology chart. Now, the way it's been cast is to place Jupiter and Neptune on the ascendant, the first house cusp, together. So we're seeing it from that perspective because everywhere in the world, in each time zone, has a different ascendant. So we're looking for a mean average perspective. You could look at this exact chart, just exactly with the degrees of all the planets from different angles, but we're taking this one, and it's a good one to take from this, to get the kind of insights we're after here. Now, what's significant about this chart that really grabbed my attention, there's a few things. First of all, 23 Pisces 58 is why we read in the Sabian symbols 24, just so you're clear about that. Now, one of the things that's really significant is that there was, at the time, this seed event was happening within the context of three important planets in Earth signs: the Moon in Virgo, Pluto in Capricorn, and Uranus in Taurus. So they kind of on the periphery of this whole chart, which is what is called, there's kind of a couple of names. There'll be a bit of debate on what this chart pattern is, but basically it's what's called a bucket. A bucket shows where there's planets on either side that create like a bucket-like shape, and then there's a handle. So the bucket chart gives a lot of emphasis on the handle. Okay, the moon there in Virgo at 0 degrees, quite significant. That's the alpha degree. So, and at the highest degree in this chart is Pluto. So that's also a planet in an Earth sign. So the whole chart is wrapped in Earth signs, Virgo and Capricorn. And then the North Node here is in Taurus in the Western chart, and Uranus and Mercury are also in Taurus. So there's a lot of Earth in this chart. Okay, the moon in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. Okay, so that's significant as well. And what this is saying, though, is that it's kind of very apropos to say this, is that the spirituality that we all desire, this recognition of the individual soul, of individual dharma and destiny, and a celebration of us as unique people. There's lots to be said about gatherings and group consciousness and communion consciousness. It's true, but ultimately we're unique. We all know it. We all feel it. And only an oppressive energy would come along and try and extinguish that. Okay? It's a very unvirtuous energy, a very hateful and unnatural force that would try and extinguish our own sense of individuality. Even the psychopaths in the world who are at the helm of all the evil, I know that sounds a little, whatever, conspiracy-like, but, there are some major players in the world, it's always like that, who take the lead in being, problematic, throughout history. Single leaders have caused the death of millions of people. Lenin, Mao, Hitler, Genghis Khan. These one person caused so much suffering, so much hate, so much evil, so much pain. And, it's like, you wonder, are they supposed to, or are they possibly psychopaths? That, we need to recognize psychopathic energy and behavior when it presents itself and not let it happen. But unfortunately, it's happening again. And there's a whole host of them that we can recognize on the world stage if you're paying attention. But the most important thing I'm trying to really say here is that the earth, the material aspect of life in the physical body with an ego is necessary. We have a physical body. We need an ego function within that physical body. It's a feature of our individuality. The ego is the manager of our unique body system, our individual, relatively isolated, self, and it's all part and parcel of our whole personality construct. our ego. So it's not a negative thing. And once again, as mentioned earlier, unless it's an egocentric reality that we're anchored into. And it's not about morals and ethics, it's about energy. If you're egocentric, you create a kind of black hole energy. You're not giving, you're not empowering, you're controlling. That's basically what happens. Sometimes it can be paradoxical where they empower for the sake of controlling, though, so it ultimately lacks virtue if the ultimate objective is purely an empowerment for the sake of manipulation, to just kind of bring energies on board in a way that they wouldn't necessarily be if they knew what the final result of the action was. So they're being manipulated, etc., etc. The main thing here is that the earth signs represent the economy. They represent money. They represent being in the physical world, engaged in commerce, etc. So there's a lot of earth energy, and we're all dealing with incredibly difficult global economy situation, right? And it's been made difficult. It shouldn't have to be difficult. Everybody who pays any attention in a good way would say this doesn't have to be like this. There's manufactured lack. There's manufactured wars. There's manufactured everything for the sake of control and coercion. So, but we still, aside from that, need to be in the physical. We need some semblance of energy exchange, in whatever form it comes, as long as it allows for freedom and individuality and individuation, then it's generally good. Okay, so now the point here is that all that Earth is happening, and there's the Neptune-Jupiter seed event trying to, right in the kind of the nexus of it. If you think about it, it's very tucked right in the nexus of the whole story here, just right there in the bud of the flower kind of thing. And it's this beautiful spiritual theme that's a seed being planted in the consciousness of humanity. And that's what I really want to bring attention to. I want to bring attention to that it's not just to make it happen, because I can't strictly make it happen. However, what I can do is offer this awareness, this realization, this inspiration, so that by your awareness of that, even if you don't need to know a lot about astrology per se to know some of the principles and understand some of the principles I'm discussing. Jupiter and Neptune are generally considered the spiritual planets in astrology, and Pisces is generally considered the most spiritual sign because it's the one that represents the disembodied soul, to be honest. Pisces is the life between lives, the deep subconscious, the ocean of consciousness, etc. Okay, so Pisces is the mystic of the zodiac. So when you have Jupiter and Neptune there, it creates this communion consciousness, this oneness with life. So this beautiful spiritual theme. So that it's happening in the bud of this flower kind of image here, with the Earth's planets all there. It's doing a few different things. On one hand, the Earth is kind of oppressive at worst to this energy, but on the high side, because we need to be in the physical and operate in a material way without getting attached to that materialism and all of the fear that goes with egocentrism and the fear, the attachment, the control that goes with egocentrism, all anchored generally in what's called materialism. Materialism, by the way, it doesn't mean we shouldn't like the material world. It doesn't mean we don't embrace the physical. No, materialism should be understood as the conviction that the material universe precedes the spiritual, and that the notion of spirituality is some fantasy that we made up along the way. That is called a materialistic delusion, complete and utter delusion. But unfortunately, we're polarized. The scientific revolution came along and it cherry-picked. It is guilty of cherry-picking to perpetuate its position of absolutism. For example, Albert Einstein comes along and with his theory of relativity and reminds us, for example, that you can't take the observer out of the experiment. Well, the scientific community didn't like that answer. We don't want that answer. We don't like this notion of subjectivity. Well, we want objectivity. Well, you can't have it. And the first principle of neuroscience is that subjective perception rules the day. It's ultimately a subjective reality, and that's where you get the double slit experiment in quantum physics. And so the quantum physicists were very loud for some years there in the 70s, 80s, 90s, in the new millenniums, but it's kind of gone quiet somewhat, because they don't want that answer. They don't want the answer that the quantum physicists are mystical scientists who see through the illusion of the material universe as primary. They see right through it, but the psychopathic, control freak, materialism driven consciousness doesn't want that answer. It wants the answer it wants because it's control freak consciousness. It wants the answer that's going to perpetuate its agenda, its control, its hate. And that's hate is the key word. They're sick with hate, this consciousness. They kind of have a deductive mind where we'll eliminate him and her and them and the others, and we'll be left with us kind of consciousness. It becomes a highly psychopathic, highly rationalized kind of genocide consciousness. So that's what materialism creates, the sickness. Yes, religions through the ages have caused a lot of problems. It's true. Religion has been a problem, continues to be a problem due to dogmatic thinking, due to, egocentric and attachment to beliefs that might be countered by others. So it becomes this very egocentric position of religious, dogmatic fundamentalism, etc., which has caused a lot of problems. But to dismiss the essence of the spiritual nature of reality based on dogmatic religious attitudes is completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So yes, we need to honor religions, but recognize that dogmatism and fundamentalism in religion is its own form of materialism, or we can describe it as egocentric, fear-driven control. Okay, so we can see it for what it is, but that does not dismiss the spiritual nature of reality. And then we see in nature the divine design of nature is evident for anybody to see. But if you operate on a highly materialistic, reductionistic consciousness, you don't see anything beautiful. You only see everything in parts. You have a highly fragmented mind. An egocentric person can be described as highly fragmented, generally speaking, very compartmentalized consciousness, and generally live in the labyrinth of their mind versus the sanctuary of their heart. And that's what the essence of all spirituality teaches, is when we live in the sanctuary of our heart chakra, we have access to our soul nature. Okay, so this is the whole, fundamentally, that's the core principle of true spirituality. It's a science of the heart chakra, primarily, and it includes the full spectrum of multidimensionality, all the other chakras, the way we're plugged into the physical, and it goes into all these layers of understanding of consciousness, which is where we recognize that these other dimensional realities are behind the outer expression of the nature of things itself. Just like the computer you might be looking at right now, how many layers of reality are behind the screen, right? Behind, within it. Abstract and yet, just as the saying goes, both immanent and transcendent. There's an immanence to your computer, but there's a transcendental level of knowledge behind it. It's kind of in the schools, in the manufacturing factories for making the computer, etc. There's this other levels of, call them dimensions if you like. It's a way of looking at it. Okay, so now what we're seeing is this seed event, okay, of the Neptune-Jupiter conjunction in Pisces within the context of this earthy, materialistic, at worst consciousness. But earth signs are, it's true, very scientific, very much connected to engineering, very much connected to the material world in every sense you can think of. And that's such a beautiful thing. But it can also, of itself, without the other elements, become a materialistic perspective. But no element is ever without the other elements, actually. The earth, air, fire, water principle is always interactive. And that's very, very important to understand. You can't really entirely isolate them in the true sense of the model of the way the world is designed. Earth, air, fire, water. You know, there's the fiery sun. There's the core of the planet. There's the waters, literally, of the ocean. But then there's, you know, the waters of space, one might say, and or, of course, we can refer to that as air, if you like, with even though it lacks oxygen, it's kind of airy. Anyway, the point is, when you get into that four-element model, you begin to understand the deeper psychology. The main thing, though, here is that we're talking about this seed event of this spiritual event of Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces, which is occurring right as we speak, right now, in this, you know, April 12th day, and is not just a today event. It's a seed, and this seed will grow. It's being sowed right now, germinating right now, within the consciousness of all those who have felt by their destiny called to answer it. And it will continue to reverberate. So sometimes there might be little various kinds of delays, but it's happening as we speak, and it's happening to us not only individually, but collectively as well. So this is the faith, if you like. This is the understanding that can come out of this perspective, okay? So that's the beautiful story that I wanted to share with you briefly. Now, there was a little extra surprise that I thought was worth mentioning as when I was looking at the chart in the Vedic perspective, from the sidereal, which I'm going to do for you. Here we go, one moment. So what I want to do here specifically is show you the sidereal chart for this event. Now, what you'll notice, by the way, just for those of you who might be interested, Western astrology is the tropical zodiac, and Vedic astrology basically is the sidereal, and they both work very well together. What you'll notice is the difference is the degrees and the signs that the planets are placed in. But if you'll notice from before, the moon was in Virgo, and here it's in Leo, but it's exactly the same shape. The chart has the same structure, the same degree of difference between the planets. In the other chart, Pluto was here, Saturn was there, Mars was there, just as it is here. So it's a little takeaway for you people who kind of ever wondered about the difference between the tropical and the sidereal zodiac. The tropical zodiac of Western astrology is based on the sun's light. It's anchored into the seasonal round, where the sidereal zodiac endeavors to align itself with the constellations of the zodiac. There's some controversy, partially because each sign in that system, they kind of assert sometimes that that's the true system, but the fact is that the constellations aren't all 30 degrees, but they make them 30 degrees. So there's a little bit of fudging that goes on both sides. But what should be understood is that it's an archetypal perspective, and this linear reductionistic thinking when it comes to these things doesn't apply. It's kind of a deep subject. We're not going to get into it, but I just wanted to mention what I really wanted to show you was that in this chart, it's the fact that, well, there's the sun in Pisces, which is interesting all on its own, but more specifically, the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction is happening in Aquarius and at the 29th degree. Now, what's important about the 29th degree is it's considered a critical degree, a degree of overcoming. And it's kind of in the sign of Aquarius, which I generally give to the kind of to humanity as a whole, even though the moon technically represents the masses, the people, okay, the people in general, okay. It's the Aquarius sign that's kind of the humanity as a whole principle, okay, which is a big theme with the age of Aquarius coming in its dawning moment in some years to come. We're still yet to arrive at the absolute sunrise moment of the age of Aquarius, something I've mentioned for some time to those who follow me more closely, and you understand the age of Aquarius technically is not here. We're in the dawning still, and the sunrise moment has yet to occur in about 8 years or so from now. Now, what I wanted to really pay attention to, though, is that Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Aquarius, and I wanted to kind of leave you with a final look at how the Sabian symbol interprets that, because I thought it was quite appropriate for this entire little message. All right, so for the 29th degree of Aquarius, a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, keynote the capacity to utterly transform the character of one's consciousness by radically altering the structural patterns of everyday living and the types of relationships one enters upon. Now remember, this is a seed event, so it's going to emerge over time, but it does indicate that beyond the antics of various players on the world stage, which it may be argued are all part of the larger, Kali force. It could be true. It's good to keep an open mind. It's just tragic when we see people who seem to be very control oriented at the helm of power, and so many suffer. So it's hard. Our humanity is affronted by that behavior, but at the end of the day, we're left to wonder if it's not all part of a larger divine plan, and that's a challenging one for anybody. But anyway, the main thing here is, if we read it a little closer, that this butterfly, this metamorphosis principle, which is the key word, as you can see down here, but it reads, this is the second time within a very short span of the cycle that the butterfly symbol appears, which was just a few degrees earlier. Here, what is emphasized is the process of metamorphosis itself. It's the fourth symbol of a fivefold sequence in that system, and it stresses the essential character of the activity required at this stage of the cycle, which is nothing short of a complete renewal of all the implications of being alive as a human individual will do. A radical change is needed. At this stage, this change is individual and mental, and it should be seen against the backdrop of humanity as a whole. What is revealed is the potential ability of every human being to participate in a rather higher realm of evolution after his or her emergence from this critical state of transition. Well, that kind of does leave you with a little bit of a question mark, right? To wonder, what does that imply exactly? What kind of critical are we talking about? That's our ego talking, and it's understandable. So we want to give the ego some credence, a little bit of opportunity to have it say. So at this stage of the keyword, this fourth stage of the keyword is metamorphosis. In spiritual terms, this implies initiation, entering a higher realm of conscious existence, and there joining a sacred company. So it may be said that we're being initiated. We're going into a whole new consciousness. And I just wanted to take that screen away and leave it in a more pleasant kind of image, and a little info for giving me a contact should this sound of interest to you, to discover more. Where is Jupiter and Neptune in your chart? How is it aspecting? How is it a feature of your destiny, etc.? But there you go. There's some insights. Just wanted to elaborate on this very, very special event of Jupiter and Neptune forming this conjunction. And it has a great deal to do with just simply reminding ourselves that we're spiritual beings having human experiences. It begins there, and that yes, we have to operate in the material world, and we need to have an ego to do that. But if we awaken to the realization of our soul nature and aspire just by our intention right now to be soul-centered, which can be described as learning to think with your heart, not your emotions, but your heart, which is the truth center. Okay, the truth. The solar plexus is the emotional conviction center. That means the truths I believe to be the truths, as opposed to the intuitive center of the heart, which is the access to truth. It's a different kind of statement, isn't it? You're either in conviction of your interpretation of truth, solar plexus, or you're in awareness access of truth, heart chakra. Okay, so the heart chakra is the access point of the soul consciousness, which brings us into the higher realms of awareness, etc. So that's the takeaway. You understand a little bit more, a little better, that this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction is very beautiful, very powerful. It's introducing a spiritual consciousness as a seed event, not just what's happening today, even this month. It's going to unfold over the time period of the entire cycle, actually, until it conjuncts in 170 years again as a reverberating principle, and increasingly in the backdrop. So it's actually in the shorter term that is most significant, and specifically that shortest term will be between now and when Jupiter enters Aries, for example, which we'll do fairly soon, by the way, in mid-May. So it's only got about a month before it enters Aries, Jupiter, for a spell, and then it will re-enter Pisces. Anyway, those are some technical details. I do talk about them in my horoscopes. So if you haven't signed up yet, go to my website. You can get the free weekly, or you can subscribe and get the longer one where I elaborate like this, and so on. So there you go, some insights on the Jupiter-Neptune in Pisces conjunction. Very special event, very special seed event, which is now entered its germination phase, which will unfold over the coming days, weeks, months, years, literally, because of the rarity of it occurring in that sign, as I mentioned. And so there you go, some insights. I hope those are good takeaways for you. Many blessings, and we'll see you next time.